each of the panelists, Bob, Dylan, and Frank, introduce themselves and give their background, and we'll dive into the questions. So, Bob, you want to kick us off?
Yes, again, I'm Bob Hust. I'm a member with Todd and co-chair of the automotive industry team. Before coming to the firm about 5.5 years ago, I was with Honda of America for 20 plus years as general counsel, risk manager, and compliance officer for the manufacturing operations.
Hi, I'm Yaobin Chen. I'm probably only one from academics here today. So the other two of my colleagues couldn't come here because of weather. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering and also director of Transportation Active Safety Institute at IUPUI, Indianapolis, Indianapolis, just a couple miles away from here. My background has been just I've been teaching for about 30 years. So this is my 20th. I'm finishing up my 28th year teaching at IUPUI as a faculty member here. So my research area has been more in automotive related areas. Most recently, for the last 10 years, I've been focusing on autonomous driving, intelligent vehicles, and intelligent transportation systems. So today, I think my class is going to kind of provide some more technical background from R&D point of view, from a technological point of view, to see what, how that's related to insurance. I don't understand insurance industry at all, no experience, but I heard a lot of things from previous panels, and especially we have a former colleague from Purdue West Lafayette, Purdue Research Foundation with the AI, machine learning background. So that's what we have been using in our research. And personally, I was trained as a robotics and AI guy. I did all of my graduate work in that area, and I'm excited to be here to share with my experience with the people.
And my name is Frank Trigo. I'm with Generali U.S. branch. I work in the area of specialty lines insurance, vice president of product development and product areas. My background also is in extended warranty service contracts, both for home, electronics, and vehicle service contracts. So my hope is that we can have a nice dialogue, and maybe I can share some of the ideas or my experience with vehicle service contracts and how it applies to the topics that we discussed.
So before we start off, we're talking about cars here today and a lot about autonomous cars. How many people in the audience here today, just by raising your hand, have an autonomous car? Anybody? No? How many have lane sensing warnings? There's lights on your mirrors if you cross the lines. Technically, you have an autonomous car. You may not know it, but that's level 1 autonomy. How many have, it's called different things, but the radar that keeps you at the distance from the vehicle in front of you? Again, autonomous car, part of level 1 autonomy. And so autonomous cars, people think, hey, I can sit in the back seat and the thing goes on its own. Really what we're going to have is an entire progression of that autonomy, which is good for a lot of things, including the insurance industry, because it gives us some time to figure out how things should play out while we work towards level 5 autonomy, which is truly steering wheel optional. Nothing else going on. What you probably most experience is level 2 autonomy. Tesla's autopilot counts as level 2, where they will take control of the car for a little bit. As Greg mentioned, the Chevy Bolt came out and will be operating in California in a very limited geographic area without a steering wheel. That is the true level 5 autonomy coming soon. But Yaobin just got back from a national conference in DC, 15,000 people talking about what autonomous looks like. And before we dive into the insurance issues, Yaobin, can you give us kind of what timeline are we looking at? What timeline do we have as an insurance industry to get ready for these types of changes to happen?
Well, since I just mentioned, I've been working on autonomous vehicles, autonomous driving for the last 10, 12 years. Been working on a number of projects in partnership with industrial OEMs and suppliers. And also we're active in IUPUI, which is our organization, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, which is a leading professional society in many areas of standards, technology development, research. Many people asking questions about that through media reporters in the last few years about the projection or prediction of when, how soon we'll see kind of autonomous vehicles on the road, on a public road. And through our professional society, we did a lot of surveys. So to answer the question short, different people have different views, but collectively from our IUPUI organizations in 2014, I served as a general chair of our flagship conference on intelligent vehicles, which I think are used as a kind of broader definition of autonomous vehicles. Based on my experience and with my interactions with many engineers, researchers in the field, we kind of project sometime down the road in 2030 or 2035, we'll see probably a large number of autonomous vehicles on the public streets and roads. And again, the deployment, as Bob just mentioned, he actually worked for Honda for 20-some years. And for OEMs, they are more conservative in terms of their prediction. But I would say even from now, we can see level 2 vehicles out there. Cadillac, I think GM defined probably with autonomy of level 2. And then some more research-oriented programs out there. They're almost close to level 5. We call the level 5. That's a completely autonomous vehicles without steering wheel and pedals. But I believe most of them are still, putting steering wheel and pedals there, like level 4. It's almost like completely autonomous. But to make this short, it's hard to predict exactly, but for the last 4 days in Washington, D.C., there was a big meeting, annual meeting called the TRB meeting, organized by Transportation Research Board under the National Academies of Engineering, Sciences, and Medicine. So this meeting is the 97th meeting, a very general transportation research meeting. Very hot topics there are autonomous vehicles, autonomous driving, intelligent transportations, connected vehicles, all kind of things. So we think in next several decades, there will be mixed traffic, still mixed, because especially in this country, people are still, some love cars, love driving, they still want to drive on the road. And some of them keep vehicles like pickup trucks for 20 years, 30 years. So we'll see that transition for the next 2, 3, 4 decades. But the autonomous vehicles will pick up, and according to our prediction, by 2050, maybe in that time frame, we see more than 50% of autonomous vehicles on the road as a population. Too long answer to your short question.
No, good answer. So today, whether you buy or lease a car, before you drive on any roads in the U.S., including Indiana, you're required to show your proof of insurance in order to get the license plate to be able to drive the car. To the panel, what are your thoughts on the idea that with the autonomous car, that it may be more appropriate for the manufacturer to be getting an insurance policy than it is for you, the owner of the car?
Well, I think if we're going to talk about truly autonomous, again, no pedal, no steering wheel, the level 5 autonomy, it will be, my rule of thumb on that is, I don't even think of it as a car anymore. It's for purposes of insurance, for purposes of liability, I think it's a real misnomer to think of a level 5, a person who owns and operates a level 5 truly autonomous vehicle, which may happen, according to Ford, as early as 2021. That first person will walk into an insurance office and say, I just bought this new Ford Fusion and it doesn't have any pedals or steering wheel on it. Do I need car insurance? in my mind, from a liability perspective, it doesn't make any sense to think of that product, that vehicle as a car for purposes of insurance or purposes of many things, maybe even licensing. Of course, the state will get its cut one way or the other. But I think when we're talking about level 5 autonomy, it doesn't make sense. To answer your question, yes, I think you're going to see an increased products liability. It's going to fall on the manufacturer, whether it's a hardware problem, a software problem, a connectivity problem with other vehicles, or smart streets that we're going to be seeing. But I think that liability is going to end up being in the form of a warranty/products liability issue. The lower levels of autonomy are going to be fuzzier. We're going to have those levels of autonomy for a long time, for decades. A significant portion of the fleet will still have some we'll still have some level of less than level 5. You're going to have 2, 3, and 4, some level of intervention required, and those cars are still going to need insurance. Now, Tesla with their autopilot, I believe, is already getting discounted insurance from many carriers if you go in and you show that you have a Tesla. And we all know about that terrible accident in Florida that killed that fellow. There's also evidence in that case where the guy disregarded some warnings from the vehicle prior to that. But overall, those vehicles are safer. The statistics are safer. And so those will be pricing issues and actuarial issues for those level 2s, 3s, and 4s. But when you get to level 5, I think you're out of the car business and into some other business.
It's interesting because I thought about that, and I think even with a fully autonomous vehicle, there still may be some level of insurance coverage on the individual, per se. So you still have an asset, right? So if you have a collision, you have to replace that asset. Who provides the coverage? You have the liability side, if a software malfunction or a mechanical malfunction of the vehicle. But perhaps it will evolve to different types of coverages that are available. I think one interesting question, one thing that struck me as very interesting in posing the question, is the manufacturer in a position to be the insurer, right? So I find that very, very interesting. Concerning as coming from an insurance company, but interesting nonetheless in that they're collecting all this data now, right? So if we think about telematics and a fully autonomous vehicle, we can imagine that all the data on road conditions, driver behavior, just about everything you can imagine is collected there. And then we'll get into the issue later about privacy, who owns what data, but assuming that the manufacturer owns the data, boy, wouldn't they be in a great position to be an underwriter at that point, huh? And if you think back to how automakers got into the financing of their automobiles, right, it was a very natural transition for them to do so. It's almost a little scary in how natural this transition could be for a manufacturer to be an insurer.
Well, one point I want to make is, as Bob just mentioned, for fully autonomous vehicles, we don't even use the term for the driver. There's no drivers. So maybe you can say you're owner or whatsoever. There's no driving task involved. So everybody in that vehicle is considered occupant. So we have occupants in that kind of vehicle in the future.
And if you get the chance, I would go see the TASI that Yaobin leads up. One of the projects they're working on right now with Ford and Toyota and BMW and a number of other companies is actually how do you redesign the cockpit? You know, if the seats don't have to face forward, you know, what are the optimal ways to lay out a vehicle, a safe way, knowing that there will still likely be some accidents, but when there is no driver, there's no reason that you have to be facing forward in the vehicle. That raises a whole host of issues as well. I see a lot of issues as we get to the point where, you know, maybe if for some reason, or maybe for regulatory reasons, non-fully autonomous cars are outlawed, right? They're more dangerous, and so you actually have to spend time on a track if you want to actually go drive your car. It certainly could be the case, but in that intermediary time between now and then, Bob and I are driving along. I'm either not facing forward or watching a movie on my iPad. You know, Bob's driving his '69 Corvette with a manual transmission down the road. And, you know, we're traveling down an interstate road that's under construction. There's no lane markings and no major crash, but the cars touch, right? They touch and go off and you know, priceless damage to Bob's priceless car and a little scrape on mine. You have a situation like that where I'm not paying attention, right? You know, I'm just along for the ride. Bob's paying every bit of attention, you know, feeling every bump in the road. And how will, you know, you'll be my car will have a lot of data, right, that you can say exactly where it was. But when there weren't markings like that, how do you tell who caused the accident in that case? What do you guys foresee as the issues there when you're dealing with human interaction versus autonomy and assignment of blame?
As a lawyer, I hate to say this, but I think a case like that might be, depending on the level of data collection and retention, it might even be more easily resolved. So it may not end up, I may say, hey, that thing, which is what I would probably call it, hey, that thing zipped over and scraped my car. Presumably, as part of the claims adjustment process or perhaps litigation, that data is going to get pulled. And I don't know if that sort of data would be the kind that is kept. If it is, then perhaps that's something that's resolved more easily. If it's not, I think, in your hypothetical, I have a very difficult time as society gets more comfortable with autonomous technology, convincing people that I was right and the machine was wrong.
I mean, those situations are quite complex, right? Because you're not fully there, you're halfway there. So you have human error, you have possibly machine error, and then you investigate and you find out, oh, it was the software glitch, this little thing that came crashed into your leaf. So I think that is going to be very murky and will probably be resolved, like you said, through claims and potentially the litigation process to determine who's at fault. The advantage the autonomous vehicle, the advantage or the disadvantage the autonomous vehicle will have is that all that information, a lot of that information will be known about the movement of the vehicle, if they changed lanes or didn't change lanes. So it certainly makes it easier to figure things out. But when you have both human interaction on the roads and autonomous vehicles on the road, it's going to be very difficult.
Matt? I have a question that kind of dovetails along with your hypothetical and the response I'd like to get their responses on, and that's with respect to, while Dr. Chen was in DC with 15,000 of his closest friends, earlier in the week I was at CES in Vegas with 150,000 of my closest friends, and all kinds of things on autonomous vehicles there is unbelievable. And I stopped by one of the booths and talk to a software company that wants their operating system to be, you know, what all the autonomous vehicles use. I asked them about this liability issue, and their response was, we can track away, that's not our issue. It's like blaming Windows for when you screw up your computer. I was like, talked to several, that was their position. I was like, that'll be interesting. I didn't fight with them about it, but I was like, that seemed pretty dismissive. You know, especially, you know, Bob's an attorney, and right from the insurer standpoint, you subrogating? Are you going after those folks? And you know, what are your guys' views on, is that going to change?
I imagine those folks never had Windows crash on them. I mean, really.
They only use the Apple computers.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it's challenging, and that's why we're having this conversation, right? Because we don't have these answers yet. It's just kind of thoughts about how you view it. You know, it's going to get messy in some respects, I think, in terms of litigation and possibly subrogation claims back to a manufacturer. The insurer finds a defect in the software or the systems that led to the accident. I mean, I think, Bob, you can talk more about it, but, you know, if a system fails today, right, so you get autonomous, but your power brakes don't break, right? We've had plenty of cases. You know, who does it go back to? So the manufacturer could have liability there.
Yeah, I mean, the most analogous situation I'm familiar with involves airbags. And airbags have a fairly complex sensor system. And manufacturers are at the front end of litigation when they're defending whether their airbag performed properly in the crazy dynamics that you get in a serious motor vehicle accident. I think those, they may be thinking in terms of it's inconvenient if my desktop crashes and I lost the latest version of my 40-page document. I'm not sure a lot of people are going to bring lawsuits over that, but if my car goes careening into a ditch and somebody's seriously injured or killed, I think they're extremely naive to think that they won't be part of the lawsuit. Now, contracting liability away or getting indemnities and all of that, yeah, there's a ton of back office that already goes on in the terms and conditions between suppliers and the ultimate, I'll call a manufacturer. Right now it's the car companies that are the ones interfacing with the customers. Some places you read it may be Apple selling cars instead, but let's say it's the manufacturer. They, depending on the terms and conditions with their supplier, they may have indemnity obligations or something like that, but that would be the subject of negotiation in the back office. But they won't be able to, it'll be interesting to see how successful they are contracting much of that liability away.
I had a follow-up question to that, especially when you mentioned the reference of perhaps somebody's hurt. So when we talk about the dynamic between the time period of getting to a truly autonomous automobile to this world that we're living in where people are driving, you have some that will be doing it part-time, and then when you finally get to that, the shifting dynamics in insurance. So when we talk about, even if you're an autonomous vehicle, do you want some form of coverage because perhaps, Bob, you were in the accident and really doesn't care whether you were at fault or not. That person in that automobile was hurt, and they want to make sure they've got some form of protection because they don't know whether you have insurance or not, right? Just like in the traditional, but since they didn't own that car, they still would have some exposure. Then it comes back again to some new evolution of insurance products and different ways that we're going to have to think about as we move forward in the future. I appreciate your thoughts on that.
I mean, just,
No, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, I mean, in general, yeah, I mean, that's the thinking today with insurers, right? So what are these different types of coverages? Where do we come in? Where does the manufacturer come in? In my group, we don't write autos, so we don't spend a whole lot of time on that. But one of my concerns, just knowing the insurance industry as a whole, inclusive the auto, we're just kind of stuck in a kind of a status quo mentality to some extent. You would be surprised how status quo it is. I mean, I was surprised. And how archaic maybe some of the systems and ability to analyze data is, and you know, unfortunately, the culture even within our industry and how we view certain things. So I don't really have a great answer for that, other than I think we need. That's why a conference like this is important. We need to start thinking about it now and talking about it now, and seeing where solutions possibly come in. From my side, I work in product development, so my side is always about what products would solve a problem or fit a need. And I see it in my company, because I'm not an auto writer, but I get excited about thinking about these fringe type coverages that a pure standard auto insurance writer may not be interested in writing, right? So there may be offshoot things like cybersecurity, vehicle, and different insurances that we find very interesting.
Yeah, and again, I'm not an insurance expert by any means, only as a customer individually and for a time with Honda, but I would think it could even be, in a fully autonomous environment, it could even be part of your umbrella policy. You know, there's a line in there, I'm paying $20 a year in case something crazy happens with my autonomous car. If I don't own an autonomous car, you know, I don't know what coverage I have today for hailing an Uber out there. It would be kind of the same the same situation, I think. But I agree. I think you'll see products of different kinds filling the void. And I think the most dynamic part of that is that quasi-autonomous space. Because I think once we get to full autonomy, it's going to be a lot, it will seem a lot more like the 60s and 70s and 80s and car insurance and what we understand about it being a settled area. But until we get to that full autonomy, it's going to, as I mentioned earlier, I think those intermediate autonomy levels are going to be a pricing issue, a risk assessment issue. And then you're going to have new dynamics because you're going to have a mixed fleet out in the world of autonomous and non-autonomous. If I could just take one more second on this, but bear with me, but we all know that people will engage in all kinds of nutty behaviors, right? So we're going to have, I mean, that's guaranteed. So we're going to have young people jumping out in front of autonomous cars to see how fast they stop and that sort of thing. But one, maybe incongruous, but I'd probably be the last person in this room to get an autonomous car, not because I don't trust them, but because I like to drive. But I was thinking about the dynamics of this, and let's imagine a world where, say, 20% of the fleet out there are autonomous cars, and we know what they are. You can tell what they look like because they're all funky looking, and we're driving around. And we get used to them, and we know how they react. So now I'm driving my non-autonomous car around, my 69 Corvette, which I wish were a true story, not a hypothetical. And I now come up to a stop sign, and there's an autonomous car there. I'm just, screw it. I'm going to go to the stop sign. It's going to stop. Or I know that I can cut it off in traffic, and it's going to stop. All of a sudden, you're going to have people out there in this interim space as it evolves, driving differently, and that's the only example I can think of. There's probably going to be a million other things you can't think of. But you're going to have people out there being hyper-aggressive, maybe not out of any sense of antagonism, but just because they can do it. It's an autonomous car, I'm going to cut it off.
New form of road rage.
Yeah, and it'll be the
Rage
people-
against the machine.
And the people will be mad at the ones in the autonomous car because, as Matt and I were talking about this earlier, you're a four-way stop and you're the only autonomous vehicle there, and everybody else just keeps running down the stop sign and your car. Anyway.
I'm glad Bob clarified for us. It's going to be the young people that are jumping out in front to see if they'll stop. It'll be us older folks that are driving crazy to see how they react.
I'll be dawdling in front.
And Ray, I think, just to close the loop on the question, some of this is going to get down to insurable interest, right? At some point, right now, about 35% of the vehicles purchased are leased, so they're actually owned by the manufacturer. But it's really seen more as a financing tool, even though it's a lease and you're paying a monthly rent. But you do have vehicles that's different. Honda has their new hydrogen fuel cell car that is not available for sale. You cannot buy it. The only thing you can do is pay a rental fee that includes insurance and things like that. And that, I think, because of that insurable interest issue. So I think, as we go more that way, and I've heard there's a lot of car companies that will never say this publicly, but don't love the dealer network. That they view that as a huge level of profits that are being taken by not them, right? And so some of the fleets, the Uber and Lyfts, are ways to bypass that and get cars out on the road used by consumers, but they don't have to pay dealers these profit margins. And it may be one more way as they try to say, well, for safety reasons, for data reasons, we need to transition to where we own the car. There may be some ulterior profit motives, that are part of that as well that we may see. But speaking of the data, that's kind of the next place that we're going. What's your understanding of who owns all this telematic data that's already being collected in vehicles?
I mean, the manufacturer has the mechanism, right, to collect it. So they're the collectors of the data. But essentially, and I'm not going to go into attorney world here, but there are privacy laws to protect us, and on a state-by-state basis, I imagine, as well. And there will have to be some level of consent, right, from the owner of the data, if in fact we are the owners of the data, for the manufacturer to use that data in certain ways.
I don't want to get off topic, but I found this part of it kind of interesting because I'm a bit of a marketer too. So I thought about the types of data that can be collected, right? And so you have the technical data, let's call it technical specs of what's going on in the vehicle, what the user's doing with regards to driving the vehicle, maybe what road conditions, some external conditions are. So that's one set of data that's useful. But then you have the infotainment set of data. That's the one I kind of am interested in, right? So, you know, what is Frank listening to on Pandora, right? Is he listening to heavy metal, or is he listening to smooth jazz, right? And all these other behaviors that we have, it sort of makes me think about Google a lot in terms of the way Google collects data about us, and we willingly give it to them, by the way, because it's cleverly, I won't say this, I don't want to sound negative about it, but it's cleverly disguised in a way where you're not really giving your data, but you're allowing them to use your data to help you, right? To make your life easier. So I get, you know, on my Android phone, I get, hey Frank, it's time to go over to the gym, because it knows that at a certain time I generally do that. Oh, and by the way, there's this smoothie shop that you might want to stop at, right? So that type of data, I think, has the potential to be misused as well by marketers and advertisers if it's in fact then being sold to your preferences. And if it's done in a manner where it's a convenience to you, like, hey, I know you're going to pick up your kid at school, why don't you stop at Starbucks, it's on the way, and by the way, we'll order the latte in advance, just press here. And you find that convenient, then you don't mind so much that they know your behavior and your patterns and everything you're doing. So it's kind of interesting to me in that way, and that would be my concern on who owns the data and then how they use it. The other thought I have on that is there'll have to be probably some level of consent, but it could be, you know, forced consent in some ways. Like, hey, you want to buy this car or use this feature? Well, it's, you know, and you sign on. And the last thing I'll say is you would be surprised that people aren't as concerned about privacy as we might think they are. So certainly, if you ask me for my social security number, I might be taken back a little bit. But we have no problem publishing our profiles, what we do, what we're doing, what we're eating at the restaurant at that particular time, how Google uses it. Google gives you controls to go in and change your settings and do all that, but the majority of people don't do that. You can if you're adamant about, I don't want Google to know anything about me. You can do it. They read your emails, they customize messages tailored to what you're writing into your emails, and ads, and digital display ads, and paid search marketing, and all these things. So we're already doing it. So I don't see that the majority of the population would have a problem with them collecting our data, but I would have a concern about how it's being used for marketing and advertising purposes.
Well, let me just add a couple of comments. With today's technology and future technologies on cars, especially autonomous vehicles, there are a lot more data available than we can imagine today. Especially, you know, a little bit more personal data, because we drive cars, you know, between home and work, and someplace you probably don't want people to know you're moving, where you're moving around, and especially more, you know, your personal, you know, data, like your home address and the place, you know, you drive to, and that's you really don't want people to know. So with autonomous vehicles, I think not only just data per se, you may have some, you know, video data, you know, some other data you think are more, you know, more private form that you don't want to release to anybody. So I'm not sure how OEMs, you know, car manufacturers will manage, you know, all the data. If there's a kind of long document with a list of data, you know, that you sign off, you know, say, okay, feel free to log in my data, you know, store somewhere, and do whatever manufacturers want. So it will be very complex issues, I think, when we get to fully autonomous vehicles by that time. So that's from research point of view, as Bob just mentioned, a lot of challenging issues out there, including like many researchers in our field are working on different research problems, including driving behavior of autonomous vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, and other drivers, how autonomous vehicles and other regular cars interact, and also how autonomous vehicles will interact with the other road users. So those are not data issues, but then again, I just want to add one comment there to Bob's comment.
So along with autonomous, we've already seen some big changes with ride sharing, Uber, Lyft, and all those. The expectation is that will grow even more so as we have autonomous vehicles that take the cost of the driver out of that. So now you're just paying them to go from point A to point B, and the vehicle's doing all the work there. And a lot of people predict that at that point, a car will become a luxury. There will be wealthy people that want their own car, on demand whenever they want. But for the vast majority of people, it will be much cheaper for them to call a vehicle when needed, and they'll get in. And kind of like the Blue Indy rideshare, if you're here in town, you have to drive that car, but it's an on-demand, pay-per-use service. Assuming we go to that, predictions are that you'll see mileages per year go dramatically up, because the car can be used 24 hours a day. Not just right now, our car sits 90+% of the time in a garage or on the street somewhere. What do you see in terms of extended warranties and things that come out from an industry standpoint, knowing that you'll see vehicles rack up a whole lot miles sooner and not have the same life cycle that we've typically seen?
So thinking in terms of the ride share, so typically vehicle service contracts will exclude commercial uses, right, typically. But the ride share problem could be a little bit, the Uber issue could be a little easier to solve, because there are DSC administrators now coming out with specialized products. They're a little bit more expensive, to be a surcharge, but catering specifically to that segment. So that one, I think you can solve for that through rating it properly, the proper premium, as long as it's reasonable and affordable, and market is willing to pay for it. That market, the ride share drivers are willing to pay for it. I think when you get into like the fleet scenario is where it becomes really challenging, because generally the fleet business in the U.S. really doesn't, while there are some commercial vehicle service contracts out there, really the fleet, when you get into that fleet mentality where you have hundreds, maybe thousands of cars, it's just not practical to have vehicle service contracts. So those people prefer to maintain it themselves. They build the manufacturer. They may negotiate an extended warranty as part of the purchase with the OEM, the manufacturer of the vehicle. So that one becomes very difficult because the usage is intense, the wear and tear is intense, and just sitting here today, I mean, I can't see how you can rate a vehicle service contract to take that kind of usage and still make it the premium palatable that someone would be willing to pay for that premium. So I think that one is more challenging than the Uber rideshare CSC model.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think the Uber situation is that challenging at all, and I don't know how you're going to. It depends on the size of the fleets, but if you're going to have in every city like this one or Cincinnati, where I'm from, if you're going to have multi-hundred car taxi fleets, whatever, I think you're in a totally different paradigm than the typical vehicle service contract.
Do you see any possibility for I call it a hybrid insurance product, where your insurance is serving as that extended warranty of sorts? So that you're insuring against not just an accident, or issue related to that, but you are insured against breakdown of the product, all in one hybrid product.
From the vehicle service contract standpoint, I'd say I would answer that in terms of the autonomous vehicles. So I thought about that, and I thought, well, geez, yeah, it's quite possible that you can offer a vehicle service contract. The manufacturer could bundle it in as part of the lease that says, okay, you have this autonomous vehicle, we're going to warranty, the components, obviously, and the software, and then we're going to add this level of liability insurance, right? So
if the software, the component fails and you have to have an accident, we cover the liability of that failure, right? So I can see that being sort of a liability policy being bundled into a vehicle service contract. The challenge there is, you know, again, as we all know, is from a regulatory perspective, is well, how do you treat that now? So is that an insurance policy or is that a vehicle service contract, right? So you have that debate. But it sort of opens the door. I don't know how much you guys know about vehicle service contracts, but it kind of opens the door to something called mechanical breakdown insurance, MBI, which is basically what vehicle service contract coverage is, very similar, but it's done by insurance companies. Not very popular because it's very difficult to distribute, right? So you gotta have licensed agents doing that. So VSCs are more popular, but I thought to myself, so there's an opportunity for MBI perhaps to make a resurgence in the market if an insurer could then cover things like liability and consequences or damages as a result of that. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Going back to data, cars are collecting more data. Some drivers are voluntarily collecting more data. We talked about Progressive and State Farm and some others that have that and give that. How do the insurance companies decide what, you talk about inputs and maybe limiting inputs, how do they decide what inputs either are allowed or should be allowed into the system to do that? And the example I give is you have two drivers. Driver A drives 90 miles an hour everywhere they go. They don't stop fully at the stop signs. They do all those things. And they've driven that way for 10 years. Data's been collected. They've never had a single accident. Driver B has never exceeded the speed limit in 10 years, stops for 30 seconds at every stop sign, and has caused 4 accidents. Right? That's in a 10-year period. How, as an insurance company or as a regulator, do you determine what data, you know, clearly looking at those two examples, right, the slower, more defensive driver is a much riskier deal. But how either from a regulatory standpoint or from an insurance company standpoint, should you decide what inputs there are allowed into the process?
You want me to go first? I'm the insurance guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that having all this additional data is going to give underwriters flexibility and more control when they're looking at risk and when they're pricing the premiums out. And obviously offering good incentives for good drivers, right? And higher premiums for bad drivers who are not writing their business, I don't know. But I think the industry will be challenged by itself, really. And I said this when we started talking about the challenges of, so you have all this data. I mean, companies are collecting telematic data now, right? And they basically take all this data and they create profiles. They create risk profiles. And you fall into a risk profile because of your driving habit, right? So if you only drive certain miles to work and live in this county or whatever, so an underwriter will form that risk profile. The idea is though, when you get into telematics, and now you have tons, gigabytes of data coming at you on individual driver behavior, how as an insurance company do you analyze that? Do you synthesize that? Now it's so granular that it goes beyond having a risk profile. It's you, right? It's you as a driver. Do the insurance companies have the capability to do this? And then do they have the capability to use that data and append it to already their existing risk models, right? Do they have the systems, the technology? Do they, so this is the challenge. Then you think, well, yeah, geez, they could do that. But in practicality, I've been in the insurance industry for a long time, and you would be surprised how challenging those things can be to do, right? From a systems, from a people's standpoint, and from a culture standpoint, on how you assess risk. So we have this mentality of how we assess risk, and now this is kind of changing the paradigm on how risk is assessed. So I think there's going to be challenges, and then beyond that is how do you do that underwriting with the goal of being more profitable as an insurer, obviously, and then also possibly providing a better customer experience in the claims process. So I think those are going to be challenges for the industry. And I know that it's being talked about, it's being looked at, but even in some insurers that I've worked for where they were getting this type of data, it was very difficult to assess it and put into an executable kind of format where you could actually do something
to help increase the bottom line.
Last question for you, trying to assign risk or assign fault. So currently in cars today, we talked about active safety, whether it's the lane departure warnings or the backup sensors that let you know. As those get more commonplace and you know, maybe even become mandated like backup cameras are now, you know, on every new car that are sold, at what point do you think the driver has the ability to trust that, where, you know, I'm driving down the road, I look in my mirror, don't see a vehicle, there's no red light on, no yellow light on, I start to turn and run into a car that was in the blind spot because the sensor failed, the software failed, who knows what the reason was, but it didn't work. Right now, the fault would still be assigned to the driver because they have that. But do you think you see a transition period where the fault will no longer be the driver, and it's assumed that that technology should be good enough that can be relied upon?
Well, let me address this first. So as we can see today, there are a lot of what we call the active safety technology or systems available on vehicles, and even sensing devices, cameras, or some other sensors. I think all of them are still having some limitations, in my opinion. I'm driving 2017 Volvo XC60, you know, with a camera, with a radar, with ACC, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping control, all kind of things, park assist. But I still think, as a driver, we are designated drivers. We are responsible. So even you look at merging, you look at you know, some kind of monitoring light there. In my opinion, 99% you know, times they are accurate. But still, I think for safety purpose, we still want to take a little more precaution or extra steps to just make sure you know, you're safe. So, but from my research experience, I just want to tell everyone here, I really think today's advanced active safety technologies and systems, you know, that are available on many vehicles. I really think from a lot of data research, you know, results, they all, I think they really improve safety and enhance safety. And I personally, you know, I have been working in this kind of area for more than 10 years now, and I feel comfortable. And one thing, as Bob mentioned, don't even try to cut, you know, in front of cars with a pedestrian detection system. My car got that, pedestrian detection, and also bicyclist detection. But with that kind of system, there's a limitation. Just like a human driver, you know, you don't have enough time to recognize things, to hit a brake. So the car like that, like my car, comes with autonomous emergency braking. But with that autonomous emergency system, braking system, there's a limitation there. If suddenly there's a bike cutting from somewhere, like a darting situation, it's very risky. So don't even try that, you know, test that.
I wasn't recommending it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so there are limitations, but one message I want to convey here is they really improve safety, you know, significantly, and because from data we know 76% of crashes are due to human errors, drivers' error.
And this is only tangentially related, but I think it's a tipping point that we're going to see when that day comes, and when you can and can't rely on a certain technology, whether it be I mean, if your backup camera is turned off, there will come a day when people are driving those who have never had to turn around, and it will, what do I do now? So you're going to have that situation. So it will be a transition, and then you alluded to this at the beginning. We eventually, I think, will get to a day where we'll have enough fully autonomous vehicles on the road that those of us who are driving a non-autonomous vehicle, it will almost be presumptively negligent to do so, because who do we think we are that we're better than the computer? And then we'll all have to take our cars to the track on the weekend, just like people ride horses now. But that's just my 2 cents worth about where we're heading. When we get there, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years.
We have a question from the audience I wanted to make sure we get to real quick. So let's say we get to a level 5 fully autonomous state. How would things change if, let's say, the primary rider was under 16, didn't have a driver's license, or they were disabled in some way, do you think the landscape of insurance, the regulation, and all those different aspects would change with someone like that riding in the car or vehicle, or whatever it's called?
My view is when we get to that level, it won't matter really how old the person is. They certainly won't need a license, just like you don't need a license to take the elevator in your building. It's gonna, as long as they can get in and type in the right address or whatever they have to do. I see all of that eventually going away. And again, we're talking fully autonomous. Up to that point, I think there will be different levels of skill required. I mean, they may, as soon as every car parks itself, they probably won't test for parallel parking anymore. But for fully autonomous, I think you'll get away from having to have an operator's license or having to be a certain age or something like that. That's just my opinion.
I think there may be some minimum age required. At least you know how to read, you know how to push the button, you recognize those buttons. So, and very basic training. Probably will not require, like 16 years old or older. That's my opinion.
No, I agree. I mean, there'll be some minimum requirements on how you have to press buttons, but my 11-year-old knows how to use every device 100 times better than I do. So I imagine an infant would be able to, at some point in time, get into a car and start hitting some buttons and take himself to daycare, perhaps.
Bob and I will need to ride with our grandchildren so they can make sure we know how to get from point A to point B.
I'll be the one who needs help pushing the button.
That's right.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.